To study the science of modern communication, we must first establish a baseline definition. Academically, media refers to the primary means of mass communication. Its core mechanical function is simple. It is a system built to reach a massive audience at a single point in time. For centuries, the scale of that mass audience was restricted by the physical materials required to transmit the message, whether that meant printing on paper or broadcasting a radio wave to a fixed geographic radius. In 1990, the birth of the Internet bypassed these physical constraints. Both the speed of delivery and the scale of the network moved beyond historical limits. By the end of 2018, that expansion resulted in 4.1 billion Internet users connected to the same global architecture. We can see the localized density of that saturation here. By 2021, 45% of the population of India was online and processing digital information. This saturation has transformed media into an omnipresent environment. To be a modern human is to be immersed in its constant flow. This saturation creates a distinct biological problem. Human neurology evolved to track slow, localized social groups, leaving it ill-equipped to process this density of information. Addressing that biological strain required an institutional response from the American Psychological Association. In 1986, the APA codified a new subdiscipline to study this environment, establishing Division 46, Media Psychology. The core mission of this discipline is to systematically measure how evolving communication tools reshape human cognition and behavior. To map this out, we can divide the curriculum into 4 distinct vectors: the historical baseline, virtual interaction, persuasion, and representation. Tracing these specific psychological vectors is a necessary step in understanding modern human development. The psychological desire to broadcast a belief to a wide audience is an ancient human trait. We can trace this impulse back to the 2nd century CE, specifically to a Greek Epicurean named Diogenes of Oinowanda. Looking at this stone block, we see his chosen medium. Diogenes ensured that 25,000 words of Epicurean philosophy were carved into a portico wall. The limitation of this era is clear. The cognitive influence was bound by physical geography. You had to walk to the wall to read it. Centuries later, the printing press vastly increased distribution. But as you see here, reading a magazine or book still required active physical engagement and deliberate selection from the audience. The arrival of early electronic media eliminated that friction. Radio allowed passive listening, broadcasting information simultaneously across vast distances directly into the living room. The television boom of the 1950s compounded this effect, combining passive reception with high-saturation visual capture. As the physical friction of distribution decreased over time, the cognitive load and psychological influence exerted on the audience increased. This brings us to the first modern vector, virtual interaction. The dominant psychological concept here is the formation of parasocial relationships. These are one-sided psychological bonds. An audience member develops emotional intimacy toward a media figure who does not know they exist. Modern fandoms are built by leveraging these specific bonds, converting passive viewership into deep emotional investments. At the extreme end of the spectrum, the behavior escalates into celebrity worshipping, where the parasocial bond begins to dictate the individual's identity. We contrast this one-sided dynamic with gaming behavior. The user has two-way agency to influence outcomes within the virtual environment. In both cases, digital media tricks our core social instincts, simulating interpersonal connections where none physically exist. We see a similar use of our instincts in the second vector, persuasion and influence. The positive utility of media persuasion is visible in public health communication. Institutions utilize targeted media campaigns to raise awareness and reduce the stigma surrounding specific behaviors and medical conditions. However, that exact same persuasive architecture carries a severe negative psychological load. Prolonged exposure to media violence, for example, measurably shifts an audience's cognitive baseline, normalizing aggressive responses in physical spaces. Furthermore, curated visual representation routinely harbors and amplifies severe body image issues and eating disorders among viewers. The engagement mechanics driving these platforms are so persuasive that they trigger clinical behaviors like internet gaming addiction. The architecture of media shapes public health outcomes, pushing demographics toward different cognitive states. That brings us to our final major vector, representation and social reality. In psychology, media operates as a primary agent of socialization. Because no single person can experience the world firsthand, the brain relies on narrow media inputs to construct a working model of society, simplifying information into rigid stereotypes. We see this data filtering process occur most aggressively across three primary domains. Firstly, across gender, then through politics, and finally ethnicity. It also dictates our understanding of danger, specifically regarding how crime is represented on screen. When a specific type of crime is broadcasted, the social construction of that threat alters the public's perception of actual risk. Our internal map of society is largely drawn by the media we consume, rather than the objective reality outside our doors. Looking at this completed taxonomy, the scale of the psychological impact is evident. Media is an environment shaping our social bonding, our cognitive health, and the perception of reality itself. As the hardware delivering this information has rapidly accelerated, the academic field studying it has had to evolve in tandem. Reflecting this shift, APA Division 46 rebranded as the Society for Media Psychology and Technology. This update acknowledges a structural reality. The physical technology we use dictates how our brains interface with data. We are integrated into this system. To understand education, behavior, or human development today, you can no longer separate the human mind from its media environment. They function as a single unit.